Here. This is the first Star Wars Jedi Apprentice book that was published and released in the year 2000. The Uncertain Path is the immediate sequel to Jedi Apprentice 5, The Defenders of the Dead. Picks up right where the previous book left off and details the conclusion of the final war on Melida Daan, at least as far as this population and generations will ever know. We're pretty sure, but it's a really good book that examines a lot of questions about war and about the aftermath of a war. I was originally going to make this review and discussion video of the book quite a while ago, shortly after my uploading of my video for Book 5, The Defenders of the Dead. But I've been thinking a lot about it since. A lot of new questions and conversation topics have come to my mind, even as recently as yesterday. I was very busy yesterday. I was actually planning to go with my younger brother to the pre-release event and tournament of Magic the Gathering Guilds of Ravnica. Turns out neither of our schedules really allowed us to do that, but we are going to try to go to the next one. That should, let's see, Top of the Game store that I usually go to. Events happen about every 3 months. The pre-release events, I mean, they have other gaming events going on all the time, but I can make so few of them because I'm very busy, and so was my younger brother as well this weekend. But we will try to go to the next one, and he and I are also going to try to collaborate and talk about books and stories and movies more. When he came over, we ended up getting Subway sandwiches and coming back here and watching the 2009 Star Trek, which he either had never seen or does not remember seeing, and we were talking a lot about the movie as it played. I was introducing him to the I've been trying to introduce him to the Star Wars Expanded Universe. He asked me as we were walking back, does Star Trek have an Expanded Universe too? Yes, they do. I just know a lot less about it, but the 2009 movie of Star Trek is a great movie to watch for anyone who wants to get into Star Trek as well. I actually didn't really watch either Star Trek or Star Wars as a kid. I didn't see Star Wars till, this would be the original trilogy. I didn't see it until I was almost 12. Strange childhood mini stories. But, and then the prequels came out soon after, and after I went to go see The Phantom Menace, which I actually really liked at the time. I do think it works better as a movie than Attack of the Clones. The Council Force cast, Grey Jedi 91, Jinsarai 1, Ivanova 95, Antoine Vandelay, and Ready 4. If you watching this video also follows them, I follow them on occasion. I go through spurts here and there where I watch a lot of their videos. Sometimes I take long breaks in between doing other stuff. But they have very good conversations, and a lot of them started, as I did, getting into the Star Wars Expanded Universe through the Jedi Apprentice series. I picked it up almost immediately after watching The Phantom Menace as a kid, and I was collecting the books. I have all 18 of the books, plus several others. Not all of these are Star Wars. Some are manga, some of them are ecology and anthology books, which is my specialty, which now I have to relearn and read from the ground up because of what universities are doing, silencing a lot of studies that they don't like, which I have been trying to tell them not to do. And I've been trying to talk with the paleontologists I work with at the Natural Museum that I volunteer in, working on helping them with the database and not reconstruct so much as reorganize the fossil lab, which I'm having a lot of fun doing. It's not a paying job. I'm still looking for a paying job and also trying to help my younger brother out resource management and money. It is chaos in this world today. And these Jedi Apprentice books that talk about war and chaos are very good for bringing up conversations about. So after that long sidetrack, getting back to the Star Wars Jedi Apprentice, the Unpath, this concludes the events that began in Defenders of the Dead, a war that has been raging on the planet Daan and completely destroying it. Forged Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi were sent to the planet after a war. A and to the planet to try
interestingly similar. But but those conversations for another time. And Qui-Gon Jinn has to bring back Tal to Coruscant to save her life. She's been badly injured. She's been starved, beaten. She was going to be used as a bargaining chip. They did with, I think, Coruscant, or the Senate, or the Jedi, or something that one side was going to use her to turn things in their favor. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is only 13 at this point. I don't think he's had his 14th birthday yet, but I'll reread the series and go over. They come, they rescue her. They're supposed to immediately get her off planet. Obi-Wan Kenobi has found purpose with the other kids, the other early age teenagers, his own age, and he wants to join them. So the Defenders of the Dead concluded with Qui-Gon Jinn giving Obi-Wan Kenobi a choice. Either come back to Coruscant, come back to the Jedi, and maybe they can talk about what to do there. Or he can stay with the young, but if he does, he is no longer a Jedi. And Obi-Wan chooses to stay. When I first read this book, The Phantom Menace had just come out. I think there were a couple of books with young Anakin Skywalker, I'm not sure. Depends on the year, exactly. I was reading them just when they came out, 1999, 2000. So I forget what Anakin and Obi-Wan books were published had been published in those, by the point of those couple of years, but Obi-Wan's decision as this young teenager, this kid, came off to me as a lot like Anakin. I think Anakin and Obi-Wan would have seen much more eye to eye had they been kids at the same time, because it wasn't until Qui-Gon's death at the hands of Darth Maul that Kenobi got the hint that I can't just be this wild, aggressive Ataru attacker all the time, as Kenobi was in his youth. He was a little bit more than that. Actually, in the early Jedi Apprentice books, you do see some beginnings of a Soresu mindset. You do in some instances, I think particularly against Xanatos, in Kenobi's duels with Xanatos. Some beginnings of Kenobi learning that sometimes he has to take a more defensive approach, which is very interesting. It leads into his character later in life very well. He's just not going with that as a primary mindset yet. But the seeds are there. So, very interesting. I really love the Jedi Apprentice series. Obi-Wan Kenobi chooses to stay on Melida Daan to help the young, which is a decision I can very much see a young Anakin Skywalker making as well. And in this book, as the chaos begins yet again, we'll see Qui-Gon Jinn back in the Jedi Temple, and he's not really angry at Obi-Wan. He's not saying, kids just don't get it, kids don't understand. No, he understands the turmoil, even the psychological and emotional turmoil that Obi-Wan was going through in Defenders of the Dead and in The Uncertain Path. Qui-Gon understands Kenobi's dilemma. He just puts rescuing Tal as a priority. As, that was his mission. He should. And he did try very hard to reach a ceasefire, to negotiate peace on Melida Daan. I think what he kind of saw that Obi-Wan did not was that you can't care about saving people more than they care about saving themselves. And he did tell Obi-Wan before he left and Obi-Wan stayed, and the decision was heartbreaking for both of them. I really like that. In
And these chapters are not very long, but it managed to show that very well, that this was a heart-wrenching conflict for both of them. For both the Qui-Gon is in his... This is like... this is still more than 10 years. I think it's about 12 years before The Phantom Menace. So he's not in his 60s yet. He's a middle-aged adult. He's in his early or mid-50s, I think. The Star Wars timeline is just so berserk now that it's hard to tell. But I think that's about where he is, and Obi-Wan is a very young teenager. They both understand that this is a heart-wrenching conflict. You know, it is not easy to rebel against your elders if your elders have been good guides, good parents, good teachers, which are mostly lacking in the real world these days. But these books do a good job of portraying Qui-Gon as that, which is why one of the real problems I had with the Jedi, the Dark Side comic, which depicted Qui-Gon Jinn and a young Xanatos, was Qui-Gon... I've tried to read the comic over a few times. I posted a review video of it maybe a year or a little more or a little less than ago. I've tried to read the comic several times. I can't see Qui-Gon as he was really meant to be portrayed in that comic. Maybe I'm totally missing something, but he really comes off in that comic as ignoring Xanatos' dilemma and his needs, and as a Padawan swapper, it really looks in that comic like he's going to choose forget how to pronounce the young Twi'lek girl's name, Oryuken or something. It really comes off that he wants her, and he's way overly critical of Xanatos. Not like Anakin accuses Obi-Wan of being in Attack of the Clones. Like, he's overly critical, he never listens. Whereas, granted, Obi-Wan is not that well written in that movie. Ewan McGregor, of course, does a brilliant job with what he can, but he's still not well written. No, in that comic, Qui-Gon really came off as not listening and not caring about the turmoil that Xanatos was going through, which is not how he should have been written. But these Jedi Apprentice books, they do a lot better. He really understands how this is psychologically traumatizing to Obi-Wan. Because he is so young and inexperienced, and yet still trying so hard and finding kindred spirits with these children that are sacrificing everything to try and save their world, their future. Qui-Gon Jinn says to Obi-Wan Kenobi right before he leaves for Coruscant and leaves Obi-Wan on Melida Daan, because it's a decision that Obi-Wan makes. He says to him, "The situation is heartbreaking, yes. It is a hard one to walk away from. But walk away we must. Our mission, our responsibility is to save Tull." Effectively saying, even though it's not written in the chapter that he's saying these words, I'm sorry the situation is so terrible, but we can't save people who... We can't save a world that is not determined to save themselves. Now the kids kind of are, but they're not enough. They're not enough for Melida Daan to have a future again. I think that's the real tragedy of these books and of a lot of wars that children find themselves in the middle of, is that what sacrifices they are making, what effort the kids are putting in to try to have a future again, that's not enough of a future to build or rebuild a world from, because you do need the competence of competent adults. And when there aren't any around, when they're all consumed by war and hate, the question becomes, what can you do? Now, in the first chapter of The Uncertain Path, Obi-Wan, Keresi, and a younger girl named Rowena execute a plan to take out the Elders' fighter craft by sabotaging them when they are refueling. When they are refueling the entire fleet at the exact same time. As is pointed out, all of the weapons that have been used in the wars are aged, poorly maintained, and so must be constantly repaired just enough to be able to be used in the next battle, and same for the aircraft. So the Young's plan works, and by most definitions, early on in this book, they do win the war. And the next task, to try and rebuild their planet, is to establish a government and their authority, which, given that the oldest of them are older teenagers at most, has all the problems you'd expect them to have, though they do give it a respectable attempt. At the beginning of Chapter 3, Obi-Wan, Keresi, and Neild have taken over the Unified Congress building, which was the site of an attempt before, long ago, when the Melida and Daan had tried to come together and negotiate rather than war, and that only lasted 3 years. Now the Young claim its ruins as their new head of government, as a symbol of their new unity. However, they pretty much immediately face the very real logistical problems of how to get things done that would need to be done, and just as importantly, how to prioritize and how to allocate their efforts. It does need bringing up, had the Elders gotten their priorities and act together, these impossible tasks would have never fallen on mere children to begin with. They first tried to ensure a stop to the fighting by locking away all their weapons, save for security patrols led by Obi-Wan Kenobi that are sent to disarm the population. Now this is strikingly similar to a view that a lot of people have who have never been in the position of having to defend themselves, that you just take away all the weapons, all the fighting and killing will stop, when often, when almost always, the reality is that makes you more vulnerable, because now you can't defend yourself against someone who is bringing weapons to a confrontation. Neild wants to begin destroying the halls of evidence, the holograms of the memories of their warring ancestors, the mausoleums, which is greatly resisted by the Elders. That's what the Elders are holding on to, even though at the same time it's the memory of all the people they want to avenge that's fueling war after war after war after war. What remains of the middle-aged people, the adult generation that was not killed off in the wars, and there are very few of them, not zero, but very few. They give the young their support, as they likely want to see a future that shows them they too were fighting for a future, want to believe they have a chance to see it. Neild makes the argument that throughout all the decades and centuries of warring, the people flocked to the mausoleums to leave offerings and warm themselves with hatred and vengeance, rather than with blankets and tending to their own people and building communities. And he has a fair point there. Others, however, wish to prioritize re-establishing the medical centers, the child care centers, the housing, and actually begin tending to their people, what they should have been working on all this time, before worrying about destroying the halls, before worrying about any more destruction and starting from scratch. And those certainly are priorities.
So it's a really good example of both sides having a really good point. The question is, what do you prioritize? And this is when you begin to see a split between Neild and his followers and Kerosene and her followers. And of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi not wanting to break up the friend group he has built and fought alongside as many of the children died, is caught in the middle. And this is what I was saying by, there's only so much you can do to save people that have already destroyed their world. Now, Neild does make a point of using the rubble from the mausoleums he does destroy to build new housing. So he's not just about destruction, it's a good use of the material. But he has to deal with the resistance from the elders. When the elders tire of the children exerting authority, their first method of making a stand is to surround themselves around the halls, although, rather than the elders actually taking responsibility for all their mistakes and the destruction they've caused, and actually try to offer their help in rebuilding, or make an attempt to manage anything any better. Of course, in the decades before, they already blew that. But it's a hard question, what to do first to start rebuilding. Especially when this planet has been devastated so much, there's so little to try and start over with. When I was reading this book back when I was a kid, I took all of this as a lesson that there can come a point at which so much has been destroyed for so long that it's too late to start over. It's too late to try to do any better. There is a finite window of chance to do that, to get your priorities right, to build your social circle, to build something to protect, rather than to build a community, a family, a country worth protecting, or protect what you have already, or on the scale of an entire planet, as we're addressing in this book. Melida Daan is pretty much just a couple of steps away from being as destroyed as Malachor 5. And that's a good place to leave off for tonight. Leave you with the thoughts that will come from those. Since I do have other things to work on tonight, I will be back soon with further discussion of this book, Jedi Apprentice 6, The Uncertain Path.